Hello, poker players. Navonod HUSnG. Played a game, well, a few games yesterday with a guy who played pretty well. Goes by Rowdy Ruckus, and I promised him that I would show him the match from my perspective. So what I'm going to do, and I played really poorly. I think I ran kind of bad, but also played pretty bad for multiple matches. But what I told him I'd do is go through, give him some pointers, critique his play a little bit, let him see the game the way it went down from my perspective. And then I also want to critique my own play because I feel like I made a lot of mistakes. So yeah, I think that ought to be interesting enough for everybody because I'm not just critiquing him, but I'm also critiquing me, and then I'm pointing out some general strategy stuff. So 8-9 suited was the very first hand. At this point, we're completely unknown to one another. Queen 9 suited, slam dunk, open raise, in position, obviously. And he calls, and flop comes out, and he checks, and we reach our first decision point, which isn't much of a decision other than sizing. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning that I went with 60 into 80 instead of 40 into 80, where I may well c-bet this as a bluff for 40. And there's a few reasons for that, but mainly it's because it is hand one, and it's a flop I'm going to be betting a lot on, and I actually have a legitimate value betting hand. So it also is a little bit textured. So is this exploitable if I'm going to be, like, if I had missed this and decided to c-bet it as a bluff, I would have went probably 40 into 80. So is it exploitable that I'm choosing to go 60 into 80 instead? Yes and no. It's not in this hand because it's an anonymous site and it's hand one of match one. So there's no way for him to exploit me in this hand. But I do have to at least pay attention of the perception moving forward. I cannot just make this sizing when I have a value hand and use a smaller sizing when I don't. So I'm going to have to look for some way to shake this. If this hand does go to showdown, and he sees that I made this 3/4 pot bet on the flop with a value hand, then I'm going to have to do something to camouflage, which actually does come up, so I'll explain it to you when we get there, I guess. Okay, so I went with this sizing for value, and the ace comes. Now, he's going to check to me here. I think he checks. Yeah, he does check for sure. Okay, so he checks, and now we have another decision to make. Now, I think most players that are used to not playing heads up would just not consider, like if you're used to playing full ring, I don't think you're really even considering betting the flop and turn as often as you maybe should be. But if we really think about the types of hands we expect to be in our opponent's range by now and where the weight is, there are not as many combos of drawing hands to even have as there are pair hands. There's just fewer hands, that make a draw than that make a pair. So the bulk of his range is still going to be one pair hands, but he does have some draws. Now, he may check raise his, say, straight draws at least some of the time, so we can discount those a little bit for that reason. And just because it's harder to have a 9-8 or a 5-4 than it is like a queen anything, 6 anything, or 7 anything. But he still does have draws. As soon as he hits the check button followed by the call button, we have to put those draws into his range. But the bulk of his range is going to look like 7x and queen x and some 6x. He'll have probably more queen x than 6x, simply because more of his sixes are going to fold pre-flop. But he might have he's also going to be 3-betting probably some of the time, and more of his 3-bet range is going to contain a queen, but that's going to come up less. So I think most of his pairs are going to be queens, but not by a huge margin, and that's going to be followed by 7x, followed by 6x, followed by draws. It's kind of the breakdown of his range. So what parts of that range do we want to bet against? Well, we don't have that many queens in his range that we beat. If he's calling with all of his queens pre-flop, then yeah, we still beat a good chunk. But if he's calling with, say he's calling with a range of queen 5 suited plus or queen 6 offsuit plus, I mean, continuing with that range, so less those hands that he 3-bets, then we don't beat queen 6, we don't beat queen 7, we really only beat queen 5 suited. Those are the only queens he has left that we beat. So we don't want to value own ourselves by betting flop, betting turn, and betting river against the queens in his range. We don't think we can probably expect to get 3 streets of value from the 6s or the 7s in his range. So the draws in his range, we have to kind of figure, well, what's he going to do with those? Probably if he didn't check raise the flop with them, he's not going to check raise the turn. But we don't definitely know that, especially when it's an ace. It becomes unlikely. So if we knew he had a draw, we probably would bet. But it's not as bad as it may seem to check back, because if he's got a draw, he's going to miss it most of the time. And if he has a draw and the ace comes out and we check back, I think it's real likely that he's going to bluff the river with his missed draws. So it's not a slam dunk value bet against his draws compared to checking back and inducing a bluff on the river. It's probably a little bit better, but it's not a tremendous amount better against most players, because if we figure he's going to fold some of the time on the turn with some of his draws that we could have gotten a bluff out of on the river, and that he might even check raise some of the time on the turn, and we're going to have to fold if we bet and get check raised. It's not as clear to me that we'd want to definitely always bet if we knew he had a draw. Excuse me. And if he has a queen, it's definitely not clear that we're going to want to bet, because by the time we bet flop, turn, and river, we're almost value owning or bluffing, because I don't know that he's going to have that many queens that are going to call flop, call turn, and call river that we beat compared to don't beat. I think if we knew he had a queen exactly, I think we would also want to check back the turn. So we're just running out of hands that it makes sense to double barrel against. Now, I do think it makes sense to bet with top pair on the flop when the ace comes out on the turn. We are going to want to double barrel sometimes, because if we don't, then we're just going to be very, very bluff heavy or semi-bluff heavy anytime we bet the flop and then bet the ace on the turn. And we are going to want to bet this ace on the turn with like 9-8, or like a straight draw, flush draw, and a lot of flops. So we probably should make sure that we bet second pair for value some of the time when the ace comes on the turn. But if we're going to do it some of the time and not all of the time, I think that we should do it, one, when we've got a better kicker, or two, when we've got some kind of redraw that can happen. Or with reads when we think our opponent's just really sticky. But, just to try to maintain some kind of balance. Well, actually, you know what? I'm not going to waste a bunch of time talking about that, because it actually comes up in, the next hand, I think. So we'll just talk about the rest of it then. So, yeah, moreover, I think in a vacuum, we just want to check back. And I don't think there's anything wrong with playing our first hand in a vacuum. Right now, we're kind of in a vacuum. And he leads, so we kind of under-repped our hand a little bit when we check back the turn, but we also just have to ask, is he going to value bet second best, and is he going to be turning any of his hands into a bluff? Now, the most likely draw would have been like a 9-8 or a 5-4. Well, the 5-4 just turned into a straight, so he's not bluffing with a 5-4. And the 9-8 may very well decide to check now that it's picked up some showdown value. It might decide that it's strong enough to check and call, or he might decide to check and just hope I check back and make a decision if I bet. So I think we can discount the draws that he had on the flop as being bluffs now. That really leaves the 7s, the 6s, and the queens. And I think a good player might be capable of turning a 6 into a bluff here, but I think a lot of players would just check it. And a bad player might decide to bet a 7 for value here, but a good player might decide to check it. So I think once he bets, he really has a lot of queens in his range, and I really think, looking back on this, this is a spot where we could probably let this go. I know it looks really gross when we decide to check back the turn and then call the river, or fold the river, but what are we really expecting to see here? He had something when he called the flop, and whatever it is, he feels like he's got incentive to bet the river. Now, getting 3-1, I think it probably makes sense to make this call this early in the match, because it's probably real close to a break-even call, and if he does have something like a 6 or a 7 or an 8, we can really find out a lot about the player's mentality. So for that reason, and because it's maybe a break-even call or very, very, very slightly minus EV against a reasonable player. Plus, we don't know that he's reasonable. Plus, if he turns over a hand that's silly, we just gain so much information so early in the match. I think it's okay to make this call, but I think we can expect to lose more often than we win here. So his line made total sense. We know he's not 3-betting real thin pre-flop. That's what we've learned. And we also have learned that he's not afraid to make kind of a thin value bet on the river. I don't dislike his value bet, but it's not super thick, so we don't have to. We can think about those things. We can kind of start to develop a picture of him every time we get a showdown. Okay, so now this is the hand I was talking about. Almost identical scenario. So when he checks here, we've got a real good opportunity to bet half pot. And if we go to showdown, now he'll have seen us bet 3/4 and 1/2 in the same exact circumstance, and that'll just kind of wash itself out. We won't have to worry about that so much anymore if we decide to bluff a flop. And also, I think in this hand, after he just saw us take that line with top pair on a board that offered some draws, I think it might be more likely that he puts us on air or on a draw here. And whenever we're betting for value, we want to be able to rep bluffs, right? So I chose to use the 40 chip bet, and that's why I thought it was worth explaining why I was almost in identical situations, 2 buttons in a row, but played the hands very differently. Now the other thing here is now I think maybe it does make sense to bet the ace because we're repping like a draw. You know, we are trying to kind of rep a bluff when we have value, rep value when we have a bluff. And I think that if we had a flush draw here, we're going to bet this ace all the time. So I think that combined with the fact that he just saw us check back second pair on the turn that was a flop top pair, we get a little bit of extra confusion that can cause him to get sticky and make it easy for him to talk himself into a late call. And if we ever want to barrel the ace when we actually have a flush draw, I think we need to bet here, because this is not going to be too tough for him to figure out if he sees us take the exact same line twice in a row. If he's a good player, the next time when we have a flush, he won't buy it when we bet the ace, right? Okay, so now we bet flop, he called, he checked turn, we bet the turn, he called, and we get to the river. What does his range look like? Well, I think it looks like busted draws if he plays them that way. We don't know yet. But certainly he's going to check call some of his draws, or at least certainly there's some chance that he will check call some of his draws. So I think he'll have some draws, he'll have some jacks, and he'll probably have some, maybe some weaker stuff, 7x. It would not be crazy to me to see him have a hand like 7x or 3x. And that's because he just saw us take a different line with top pair. So if he has a hand like a 7, he may think it's unlikely that we have top pair. And if we don't have top pair, then his 7 is likely good. Plus he's been getting pot odds. So the final question is, do we want to bet this river for value? I think we could, but I think it's really, really thin. I don't remember. I think in game I decided just to check it back, and I think that's fine. I wouldn't fault myself for making a very small bet here and hope to get hero called by like a 7. But I'm not sure if I had enough information to do that at that point in the game. Okay, Jack 10, very obvious call. Now we've got got shot straight draw, and I think with the backdoor flush draw, so we can check call, we can check raise. I usually don't think a hand like a gut shot is quite strong enough to check call against most players, so because very often players will barrel the turn if, let's say it's a wet board, and they're pretty decent, or maybe if they're just a little bit overly aggressive. Because if he bets the flop and he's got a draw, very good chance he's going to barrel the turn. We're not going to be able to call flop and call turn. Also, if he's got any kind of pair, and he's good or bad, he may think that he's got a bet to protect his hand. So I think that the preferred line here is to check raise. The other nice thing is that we've got a kind of discombobulated board that should be hard for him to have a big piece of. And he has seen us take pot control lines, so I don't think he's got any reason to think that we're super bluffy or aggro, and he hasn't seen us make a bluff yet. So, oh, and the other thing is we've got plenty of equity, especially if you count the clubs. Like if we check raise flop and he calls with even a queen, if a club comes, it's going to be pretty hard for him to put any more money in the pot, which, you know, is going to be good for us. Like if it's the king of clubs especially, we're going to want to barrel again. But so for all those reasons, because we want to fold, but we have a hand that has potential to double barrel a lot, and we do have nut potential. And if we've got the potential to, bink a 9, then it's always good to have already locked up equity against the top of his range. When we bink, essentially the nuts, because it gives us the opportunity to get stacks in, which isn't a reason as much as it's a bonus, but, in the interest of clarity, I guess, that's my rationale. Now, the 6 comes off, he did call, and I think we're just done. I think if it had been the 6 of clubs, we could bet. It's just the ultimate brick of all bricks, and I think we just need to give this one up. Don't think it's unlikely that we could get a free card here because we did just check raise him. Once he bets the turn 200 into 320, I think we just need to let it go. So far I've seen him do nothing crazy, and I don't think I've done anything bad yet either. King Jack on 4-4 deuce. Guessing he's going to check to me, and I think we need to just check this back. I don't think we're going to get called by worse. We're probably not going to get anything better to fold without going multiple streets, and we're very likely to induce a bluff by checking back, and even if we have to check twice, and I think we can pretty comfortably call at least one street. So I'm going to give a critique about RR's play there. Okay, where's my rewind feature here? Okay, so the critique I'm going to give him here. Okay, RR, if you're watching, okay, once I check this flop back, the most likely thing that I'm going to have in my range is going to be hands like ace high or 2 big over cards. I might bet a 2x for some combination of protection and value against ace high and king x, but when I check back, I'm going to have and I'll just say when people check back this flop, very often they're going to have exactly a bluff catcher, and that's going to mean that I'm going to have a hand that either just turned into a full house, like I'm going to check back a 2, and this 2 is going to smash me, or I'm going to have a hand like ace high most of the time, or like a decent or good king high, and I'm not going to fold here. Okay, so I don't like the lead on the turn. I do expect the lead on the turn. I expect people to do that an awful lot. And actually, I don't even think it's bad against a lot of players, but I don't think you've got the info you need to make this lead against me. Based on my play so far, how I have c-bet, I don't hate the lead as much as I hate the lead followed by a river give up. If you're going to bet this turn, I think you need to bet the river. And the reason is because I think once a player checks back on the flop and you bet the turn and they just call, their most likely holding is going to be a king or an ace, and if you bet again, it's going to be very hard for them to call with the king or the ace, unless it's like, even if it's the ace-5, it's still going to be tough. So I think the bet on the turn was marginal, definitely debatable. I don't really mind it because you didn't have any showdown value, as long as you're willing to fire that second shot. I think the worst thing you can do is bet turn and then give up on the river. So I think I like checking and betting about equally, but I think betting turn and double barreling river, or just checking and giving up unless you improve somehow, I think those are the ways to play this hand. So just think about what my range looks like and what you want to do against it. And I think the worst thing you could have done was just bet the turn and given up on the river. Now that's against me and other like decent players. You may well find that most players at the micro, like I don't usually play $1, which is where we're at, by the way. So you might find that when these players in this player pool check back, they always are checking back with air. And if that's the case, then yeah, stabbing on the turn and giving up on the river is fine. So as long as you've got a thought process, you know, that's always the main thing. But I will say against me or against anybody that you can identify as a reasonable player, it's going to probably be pretty bad. Now here I think we're in a spot where we can either c-bet or check back. I'm not expecting to get called by worse. I'm not expecting to I'm not expecting to get better hands to fold. So if I'm betting this flop, the only second best hands that I expect to get value from are going to be like draws, which may check raise me and blow me off of what could be the best hand. But I think I can get called on the flop and then get folds on the turn and or river. So the fact that I've got 3 to Broadway, I've got the overcard, and I've got 3 to the nut flush, I can bet the flop here if I plan on barreling a lot of turn cards. Now, as played, when I checked back, again, think about what that means regarding my range. It means I've got some kind of showdown value, or yeah, probably that's about it. I mean, that's, yeah, I don't think that, you just saw me check back showdown value, like a king high, so it should be pretty easy to put me on something like a pair of 2s, a pair of jacks with a weak kicker, an ace high with some kind of like backdoor equity that's just kind of decided to take a pot control line. So when you bet, or if you're deciding on whether or not to bet the turn, you could, you know, think, okay, well, what I need to do is I need to bet the turn and then the river. But when this jack shows up here, things get a little bit murky in regards to taking that line if you've got air. Let's see what you actually did, because I think I'm getting ahead of us. Okay, you did that, I thought so. Okay, now when I raise here, which I think was absolutely the right thing to do, what do I have? I mean, I think about 95% of the time you see this line, this is going to be a player that has a jack. I can't really think of anything else I'd have except for exactly ace high with a backdoor flush draw from the flop. So maybe I can do this with the ace of spades. Maybe I can do it with like ace x of diamonds. But I don't know. I think unless you've got a pretty strong hand, you just need to lay this down. I rep this jack really hard. You call, and the turn or the river comes. Okay, so now, what does my range look like? I guess it's pretty much jack X or some weird bluff, right? I mean, you don't think I've got a busted flush draw because you think if I'm aggressive enough to raise the turn and the board pairs, probably aggressive enough to see bet a flush draw. So yeah, I think my hand looks exactly like a jack here. Okay, so if I'm you, I might bluff catch some percent of the time because it is a small bet. It's not a huge bet, and I probably am pretty polarized, like nuts or nothing. Well, 3 of a kind or nothing. So I am polarized, which I understand that when your opponent's range is polarized to very strong and very weak hands, that you do want to be hero calling, bluff catching some percent of the time. But when I'm just going to have so many more jack X combos than bluff combos in my range, think you've got to be picky about how you bluff catch. So maybe take some number of hands and bluff catch with them, but in general, I think you want to be folding this most of the time. And I think that queen, okay, so first of all, going to the turn, I think you can never call with a 2 here, because you just cannot expect to ever get that to showdown. And I could even have hands in my range that I'm bluffing with that are ahead of you. Like, I could definitely take this line with a pair of 3s as a bluff. And, you know, if for whatever reason I decided to just check back a flush draw because I thought you were paying attention and I needed to do that some of the time, or maybe if I had like a jack of spades with another spade, if that spade is, if that spade is, no, a jack would be trips. Okay, so if I decided to take this line, I'm just trying to think of anything that makes sense for you to call against. Really nothing. I mean, you had a pair of 2s, even a random hand that I completely lost my mind with, or exactly, if you knew exactly the way I played, and I don't take this line very often, but even if you knew I had exactly ace-9 of diamonds, if you knew that on the turn, but were bound to forget it on the river, for instance, like somehow you were given the information, I have the ace-9 of diamonds on the turn, I take my turn action, but you know that as soon as you get to the river, you're not going to remember what I had. It's going to be still very, very hard for you to get this hand to showdown. I think that was a very sticky call on the turn. You got bailed out by like the only card you could have got bailed out with, and I still don't think it's a slam dunk call. So like even when you hit a deuce, you're going to be in kind of a sketchy situation. Yeah, it was I think that's a bad call. And on the river, it's real questionable too. But maybe I gave you the right price at that point with your pair of queens. I don't know. It's sketchy. I would recommend folding on the turn. I mean, really against most players, you can follow Beluga theorem, which says just never call a turn raise with one pair. And so even with like top pair, top kicker, against most players, and especially if this player checks back the flop and a pair other than top pair hits the turn, and you bet and get raised, you've got to be done with it. And especially you were betting like the bottom of your, I guess, value range. Anytime you get raised and you're at the bottom of your range, you can easily fold. So the only reason the only way it can make sense for you to call there is if you think it's exploiting me in such a way that you should call with essentially your entire value range, which would mean like I've got to be bluffing at every opportunity for that to make sense. Okay, so I guess in layman's terms, what I'm telling you is you're a little bit too sticky in these games. I think you're hero calling too much. You either, for whatever reason, feel like I'm doing an awful lot more bluffing than I actually am doing, or you're expecting me to, or you're used to it, or you're just making a categorical error, which is just calling with too many hands. You know? And really, probably the easiest way to get a lot better at Hold'em is just to start folding when you think you're probably beat. Your brain's going to try to lie to you and tell you like that the pot odds are, you know, making up for it, things like that. But really, we just don't like to fold, and we're terrified of getting bluffed, and we shouldn't be. I don't like my bet here, especially with the sticky. Okay, after I saw that call, the way that now I saw that go to showdown. So my strategic adjustment from this point forward, I should realize right now, I should already know that either you think I am completely out of my mind, or you're super, super sticky and you don't want to fold hands. So either way, if I think that you think I'm super aggro, or if I just think you're super sticky, I need to stop bluffing. This is really a silly bet. Like right after that, and I know we were talking, we were chatting, so you probably weren't playing your A game, and I know I wasn't playing mine. But I hate your call, and I totally despise my bet. So no offense, man. I mean, like, everybody does silly things, and I know we were distracted and whatnot. But, Yeah, I think I hate my bet here worse than I hate your call. If it makes it sound any better. I don't know what I was thinking. You just called a check raise with bottom pair when I rep trips perfectly, so... Yeah, I mean, I deserve to lose that pot for playing it crazy. And just to give you a little bit more advice, because I know I promised to do that, you are calling way too many 3-bets. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I really believe the truth is that you called 100% of my 3-bets. I know you're in position, and maybe you had hands every time. I wasn't 3-betting you very often. But when I'm not 3-betting you very often, that also means that you need a much stronger hand to continue against the 3-bet than normal. And I mean, like, I usually recommend having a value merged, linear, value only 3-bet range in micro stakes heads up games, because your opponent is going to make calling mistakes more than folding mistakes. He is in position, and I've talked many times about the advantages of having a linear value only 3-bet range compared to a polarized range for 3-betting out of position and especially heads up. But against this particular player, I definitely want to be value only, and probably I can 3-bet for value pretty thin. Like, I'd like to see me start 3-betting hands like Queen Jack suited and King 10 and stuff. Not at this point, because I guess at this point I've only made one 3-bet. Yeah, so just a little advice, RR, don't call so much. I mean, do some other things like folding and raising when it comes to facing 3-bets, but definitely don't call as much as you are calling. Okay, so I had a slam dunk value bet on the flop. Once again, my top pair turns into second pair via ace on the turn. When I go as check, check, I think I've got a really interesting decision. Okay, what does villain's range look like? Sorry, RR, you're the villain. Villain's range looks an awful lot like a 9. A 9 or some pocket pairs, but the pocket pairs are counterfeited. Okay, so I mean, I could definitely have bought an ace if you would have bet the turn, especially if another ace hadn't come off, but now there's not that many aces left in the deck. You probably would have bet an ace on the turn, at least most of the time, and some of your aces would have 4-bet me pre-flop, so I think the bulk of RR's range ought to be pocket pairs that got counterfeited and hands like 9x suited, and I think probably we do better to check to induce a bluff from the counterfeit bust, like pocket 2s, pocket 3s, the 2 pairs that feel like they need to bluff now. I mean, there are going to be hands like pocket 5s and 6s that are maybe just going to check back and not feel like they need to turn into bluffs, but I don't know if they're going to call another bet anyway. Yeah, I just think most villains are going to be more likely to make a betting error than a calling error, and sometimes will not have the best hand, so I think we need to check. And I think villain needs to bet some of the time. If I'm villain, I think I'm going to just take the any pair that's higher than, like any 9 with a good kicker, I think can be bet for thin value. That's probably sketchy. Like maybe anything King 9 or better could make for a value bet, and then I'd want to bluff with probably like pocket 2s, pocket 3s, up to like pocket 5s maybe, turn those into bluffs, something like that, something in that general ballpark. So I think I need to, I mean, betting, I can bet if I bet small and try to get picked off by pocket 5s or 6s or something like that. But checking I like better. I think I'm going to do some more bluffs, plus sometimes I'm going to have the second best hand and be glad that I didn't bet. Yeah, now if you are going to be bluffing here, I think you need to move more chips in, because I think it should seem pretty clear that I've got some kind of showdown value at this point. Because what does it look like I have? I mean, I 3-bet pre-flop, then I bet the flop. Like, it should be very, very clear what I'm holding right now. I played a very exploitable game, and the worst thing happened for me on the river. So when the river gets, okay, how do I explain this? Okay, what does my 3-betting range look like pre-flop? It's going to be a bunch of big aces and like medium to big pairs, right? Okay, so if I bet the flop, I still have all of that. But when the turn comes and I don't bet, guess what I don't have? I don't have an ace, right? So if I don't have an ace, what do I have? Well, I mean, if we said most of my range is going to be like big to middle, like middle to big pairs and ace X, it leaves me with almost entirely pairs like this. So I'm usually going to have a pair that is a 10 through king. Like 10s through kings is pretty much my entire range here. If I'm playing like most decent players that aren't playing super balanced and are being exploitable and exploitative, then what's my motivation here? Like, what does it look like? It looks like I 3-bet, and then I bet the flop. Now, if I had air or an ace, I'm going to bet the turn, right? If I had air and I 3-bet pre-flop, got called on the flop, and I missed everything but I had an ace, I mean, if I'm ever going to bluff, that's going to be the card to do it on. So when I check, not once, but twice. So I check here, you check back, and the river card comes and it's another ace. I mean, basically I've got no aces and I've got no air. So what's that leave me with? It leaves me with pocket pairs. If you pretty well know I have a pocket pair, what you don't want to do is give me 3-1 on a call, right? So I think your two options here are give up and check back, or move all in and hope I've got something like pocket 8s instead of pocket jacks, or that I can fold pocket jacks. Yeah, so I think the biggest critique then is going to be a general critique. I just don't think you're thinking about my range. Which again, we were having a conversation, and maybe this isn't something that you do all the time, but you're definitely making range mistakes. I think you're failing to, I don't think you would do this if you knew I had the kind of hand I have, and I think you've got every opportunity to know the kind of hand I have if you're thinking in terms of ranges. So yeah, I think you should only be doing this for value, and I don't think that you're going to get here with very many value hands. Like even, now that I've thought about it, even King 9 probably should just be a check back. Holy cow. We need to wrap this up and do this as a two-parter. Oh wow, I definitely need to wrap this up and do this as a two-parter. Alright, so I think we're going to shut it down here. Alright, let's just see one more hand. And then the next part of the video, I'm going to just let it play and put all the critiquing I can put out there at regular speed instead of pausing and explaining everything. Okay, so Jack 10 suited is a super slam dunk call for value, getting a good price. I don't think there's any reason to 3-bet. Okay, now this is another crazy. I remember this hand. I was not paying attention. I looked up and saw, okay, I've got shot to the nuts, and I've got a pretty strong flush draw. I'm going to get aggressive. Now, I'd like to say that I was doing that because I expected that my bet would look suspicious, I would get raised, and that would give me a chance to jam against a bluff-heavy range, but it's not true. I think the best way to play this would be to check and call in this specific spot with a specific hand against a specific player. But oftentimes I think that's a good spot to check raise. Not so much against that player because I think this player's a little sticky, and I think that he obviously and clearly had range advantage, so I don't think I should be check raising too many hands. I've got plenty of equity to check and call, see what he does on future streets, hope to bink a flush, hope to bink a Broadway, and then hope he gets sticky when I do. I think I should have played that for implied odds, not for fold equity. So yeah, check calling would have been good, but I was silly. Okay, so how do we get to where he's leading the? All right, I'm gonna shut her down here and start back up at the beginning of this hand. Till next time, hope that was worth watching. Apologize for my loss of voice. I really would not even have been putting this video up today. I'm a little bit medicine heady, and I've lost my voice from just coughing a bunch. But it was yesterday or day before I played this, and I promised Mr. RR that I would get this up on the page. He subscribed, so I wanted to go ahead and get something up. So there you have it. Until next time, guys. Navonod. Over.